Our sermon series that we're jumping into today is called Wrestling with God. You ever felt like you've had to have some honest struggles and conversations with God? There's some things that I'm glad didn't get recorded conversations between me and God before, because it was some pretty honest things. And I've know that I have felt like there have been times that I have wrestled with God. Have you felt that way? Now, maybe not in a loud, dramatic way. Maybe not wrestling and fighting in that way, but in the quiet, lonely moments when life just gets what feels like dark and life doesn't just seem to add up. Things aren't going the way that I thought it was going, when the prayers don't seem to work, and you're doing everything that you know how to do, but it's just still, it's not enough. And you're just there in the waiting. Like, I don't like waiting. And God taught me that this week on 2 different occasions. Like, I have to be careful what I preach on, because when I'm writing it, it seems like God puts me, he's like, all right, you got it written, now let me put you in that situation, right? I need to preach on winning the lottery or something, but this week it was waiting. And I had to go, and these words are going to make you tremble. I had to go to the DMV, right? See, y'all know, we've been in the struggle. We've been in the valley of the shadow of death. 3 hours and 10 minutes later, I have a real ID. Federal government now says I can fly on a plane, right? And it was the wait, and just waiting and waiting and waiting in anticipation, and watching people wait in the long line just to get checked in, only to get to the front of the line to find out they didn't have all their documents. Have you ever gotten to the DMV and not had your documents? And then God taught me some stuff through that. And then I ordered a package from Amazon. And Amazon sent me the package. And I get the package, and it's a computer. But the problem is, when you order a brand new computer, it's supposed to be brand new, right? But somebody in the Amazon facility decided that they needed it more than I did. So they went ahead and opened it and logged into their account on said computer. So I end up having to have this long conversation with Amazon, who apologizes. They weren't surprised that this had happened. And they said, we're going to schedule a next day pickup from UPS. And I said, what does that look like? They said, well, UPS will stop by your house between 9 and 7. So I can just leave it on the porch. No, an adult has to be there on Friday between 9 and 7 for us to pick said package up. Can I just take it to the UPS store, because I have more faith that the guys at the UPS store will get? No, because it's a high-valued item, we can't take it. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to go to the DMV on Friday. That's 3 hours of my time, right? And I'm just sitting here waiting on UPS, waiting. And at 10 o'clock on Friday, my package was still sitting, because no, just take it. I don't care. It's where we were. And I waited. Still sitting there. So I call UPS. Y'all are supposed to pick this thing up. Somebody steals this off my stuck, right? I now have to pay for it. And I gave him the guilt trip. I had to from 9 to 7, and the struggle is real. Remember I told you I was anxious. And what did they say? They're going to pick it up. I said, so you're telling me on the door sometime? Oh, I don't know. Do you have a tracking number? No, I don't. I'm going to have to be honest. There was a time, right? And then they said, oh, we'll pick it up. I said, well, how are you going to pay my time back from 9? And that package on my counter, so don't come by and try to steal. wrestling and waiting and anxiety, because we just don't like waiting, right? We're just wrestling, and we're wrestling in this tension that sometimes the tension is between what we believe and what we experience. Sometimes it's between faith, sometimes it's between fear, or it's between, there's a trust and there's a disappointment. And today, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 32, and we're going to meet this guy named Jacob. Now, Jacob literally wrestled with God he's wrestling through the night. He's fighting not just for survival, but what we're going to see is Jacob is fighting for an identity. He's fighting for a blessing. He's fighting for a future. And that wrestling match that he had with God will permanently mark him forever. So this entire series over the next few weeks is about facing spiritual fights honestly. Because I think sometimes in the tension, we tap out way too soon. Like we quit because it's too hard. This is too hard, and I don't want to do this. How many of you know it's in the hard things that we grow and that we learn and we persevere and we gain a lot more through the hard things? What do you gain when you quit? A loser mentality, right? Because I just quit. I'm not willing to put the work in to make it happen, but it's in that tension, it's in the hardships, it's in the place of disappointments that God does His best work. That if we will allow Him to work through us. And so we will face these spiritual fights with honesty. Because struggling with God doesn't mean that you're weak. Okay? Because I think that's where we get it off. This is why we have this persona that I've got to have it all put together. But listen to me. Struggling with God doesn't mean that you're weak. That just means that you're growing. Because if you don't get a bloody nose every once in a while, you might not be walking the same path. If you like, I don't feel like I have any spiritual warfare coming on my life. That might not be a good thing. You may be walking the wrong road. Because I believe in the Christian life, every once in a while we're going to get some bumps and bruises, right? Like I don't want to sell you a Christianity that everything's going to be wonderful and rainbows and butterflies and life's going to be great, because how many of you know that is a lie straight from the devil, right? I've been a believer for a long time, and I've had some pretty lows. I had some really good highs, but I've had some lows that have taken me low. Can anybody testify to the low? Pastor Tim Keller says this, that you don't really know Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have, right? Because sometimes it takes the struggle to bring us to that place when we have to surrender and strip everything that we have to realize that Jesus is really all we need. We hold on to things, we fight things, and we don't want to surrender things, and I would call those things idols when we don't want to surrender to them. But when we do that, what we're saying is, this thing is more valuable, and this is what I need. I don't need Jesus. But when we strip those things away, and we don't have anything, that's when we realize we have everything in Jesus, right? So wherever you are today, if you're standing strong and you feel like life is great, or if you're barely standing, you don't know how you're going to get to tomorrow, this series is for you. Because we're going to learn how to rest of what it takes to be able to fight through these struggles. I'm going to dive into the story. Jacob, his story shows us that a struggle is not something that we can avoid. The struggle is often where the transformation takes root. It's where the growth happens. And his wrestling match with God, I want you to understand this. Jacob's wrestling match with God did not happen in a temple. It didn't occur in a revival service. It came in his darkest moment, the lowest point of his life is when the breakthrough came. So look at Genesis 32, verse 22. It says this, during the night, Jacob got up, and he took his 2 wives. I'll just let that one sit. And his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons, and they crossed the Jabbok River with them. And after taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. And this left Jacob what is that word? It left him what? All alone in the camp. And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. Wrestling with God is a part of the journey. It's a part of the journey. And sometimes we feel bad when we question God on things, and we are honest about some things, and that we struggle with some things. Maybe you struggle with some things that you've read in the Scripture, and we often think that this is not a good thing and this is not okay. But let me tell you that wrestling with God is a part of the journey. Show me one person in the Scripture that didn't have a wrestling match with God. There was always something that was in the way, something they were fighting with. Jacob here in this passage, he's not going on some spiritual retreat, right? This is not a spiritual retreat that he has set out to go on. Jacob is scared out of his mind, right? Why? Because he's going to visit his brother Esau. Y'all remember the story of Esau and Jacob? Like Esau's supposed to get the blessing because he's the oldest son, and Jacob deceives his dad, and he ends up taking the birthright that was rightfully Esau's, and Jacob takes off with the blessing, and Esau's just kind of stuck with nothing. When they haven't seen each other in a while. This might be too real for some of you, but if your sibling took the inheritance that you were supposed to get and ran, what are you going to do about that? How are you going to feel when you see him a few years later? Right? Next family reunion, I'm going to call him out at the table. I'm going to make snarky comments when we're passing out the food. Jacob is afraid that his brother is going to take his life, to take back what is his. And he's in this moment that when he sees his estranged brother Esau, the one he lied to, the one he cheated out of everything, Jacob knows this might end in a disaster. And here I am at nighttime, in the dark, all by myself. Do you think he felt secure? Do you think he felt safe? Because Jacob, and let's just call it what it is, when you read the passage, Jacob was a mama's boy. Esau was the warrior out hunting, doing all the stuff. Jacob was mama's boy. Yes, ma'am, what do you want? Right? He's not in a place where he can defend himself and fight for himself. And what does he do? He takes his whole family, he sends them across the river, he stays behind, and then this mysterious man shows up and it fights him all alone. Look back at verse 24. It says this, "This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the what? Until the dawn began to break." So in the Jewish thought, night symbolizes more than just physical darkness. So we got to understand, we're reading this in the Hebrew language. What it's saying is, yeah, it was dark. We know it's talking about it being nighttime, but it symbolizes something more than just being dark. What it does, it represents that Jacob, so if we look at the passage, then Jacob left all alone the camp, and he's in the dark. He is in a moment of the representation that it's a struggle, it's a testing, it's an area of the unknown. None of those three words do we ever want to find ourselves in, do we? We don't want to be in the unknown. How many of you are planners? You got to know, I got to know what's going to happen next. Nobody? Okay, 2 people. All right, 3 people. All right. Other ones, like I wasn't planned on raising my hand, so I didn't know what to do. So it's not just a physical darkness here. What the writer is saying is there's a physical part to it, but there's a struggle. Like Jacob is struggling. He is in a struggle. He is in a moment of testing. This is the symbolism. He's in a moment of the unknown. And then it uses the river. The Jabbok River means to empty. And that's exactly what's about to happen to Jacob. Like all the signs were around him. When he saw the dark, he thought, oh boy, I'm in a place of the unknown. Oh, the river, that means to empty. Because here's what was about to happen. God's going to strip away every false strength that Jacob thinks that he has. And Jacob, every false strength that Jacob relied on because he thought he had full control, God's about to strip that away. And right here, in this very dark, vulnerable moment, God shows up. And listen, because when I'm scared, what I need is someone to show up and bring me comfort, right? I just need to know it's going to be okay. Just bring me a nightlight. We're good. God doesn't show up with comfort here. God shows up with confrontation. And that's often where the transformation begins. Because God's coming to confront some things. See, we try to run out of the nighttime back into the dawn, but it's often that God meets us in the middle of the night. In the middle of our place of the unknown, in the middle of the place of our struggle is where God likes to meet us. That's where he does his best work. And sometimes he comes with confrontation. Because wrestling with God isn't some detour in our faith journey. I believe that that kind of journey that we feel like this is just a detour and it doesn't always happen begins to become disoriented because we're in this unfamiliar territory with no clear path to go forward, and we don't know what to do, and so we try to do anything. But the further that we get into our situations where we rely on our own strength, the darker it gets. Would you agree with that? And so I'm thinking about this, being in unfamiliar territory and no clear marked paths. I remember when I was a teenager, we went to summer camp, and our camp director said, hey, so what we're going to do is I'm going to take you guys into a cave. And I thought, I didn't sign that waiver. Like, I don't know if this is okay. Can I take my flashlight? No, you can't have any flashlights. We're going to be going back pretty far in the cave, but I don't want anybody having a flashlight. Well, this is, again, a very, very bad idea, going into a dark cave with a bunch of teenagers. And we're in the mountains, so what lives in caves? See, you get it. And I'm thinking, this is a bad idea. This is going to be, it's going to be in the news, and it's not going to look good on the church when half the middle schoolers have been eaten by a bear. But we went in because we were foolish and young. And he says, just follow me. And I'm telling you, I felt like we walked forever into that cave. And we walked, and we're staggering, and we're feeling, and I could feel the roof. And I'm not very tall, and the ceiling was right here. So I'm like squatted because there's a moment that when you're leaving the cave, you start to see a little bit of light. And so when you see that little bit of light, you start to take off, and they call it the twilight zone. Because what happens is you just stand up to start to run, and you just twilight. You hit your head, right? But we get so far back in this cave. Like, I am really, it's a scary situation when you've never done it. And he has everybody just sit down. Well, we're trying to feel what we're sitting on. That was a mistake because there were rat nests, bats, snakes, all kinds of, it's like Indiana Jones. And we're sitting there, and you can't see your hand in front of your face. And I'm thinking, I don't know that I could feel my way out of here to get back where I'm supposed to. If this dude's like, you know what? I don't want to be a camp director anymore. I don't like high school and middle school kids anymore. He could just dip out. We would never know. We'd all be stuck in the back of this cave. And there was something weird begin to happen. Your hearing increased. You could start to hear things you didn't hear before. I could hear the person beside me, like heavy, panting breathing. And then your eyes would start to adjust a little bit, and you could start to see the outlines of things. But it didn't help you because you still felt like, even though somebody was right beside you, there were like 15 of us in this cave, you still felt vulnerable and alone with no clear path to get out of that cave. And so we panicked. We were heavy panted. The only way out is to trust me and listen to me and follow me on the way out. And it took us about 45 minutes to get back out of there. But it took us listening to the leader that knew where he was going. It was a thing of trust. I had to trust that he was going to get us where we were supposed to be. Because the only way forward is to trust the voice that leads you, isn't it? And that's what Jacob is. That's what Jacob had to learn, that the only way forward through the struggle, the only way forward through the unknown is I've got to learn the voice. I've got to know the voice. And in the dark, what happens is you don't need to have perfect vision in the dark. You just have to trust the right voice. Your hearing has to be on. This is why we talked about it last week. You've got to be so much in the Word that it's no doubt this is God speaking to you because you know His voice because you've been in His Word. And I think sometimes we've mistaken God's silence as a struggle for absence. Like, God, I don't hear God talking, so he must have left me. Well, we know that God doesn't leave us, right? Because He says, I will never do what? Leave or forsake you. So if we feel like God is absent, who moved? Us. Sometimes we assume that if God was really with us, things would feel easier, things would be clearer, if Jesus was physically here with us right now, things would be a lot better, right? Well, Jesus was physically with the disciples. Did they still struggle? Yes. And I think sometimes we just assume that. But what if God's silence is not his absence? What if sometimes God being silent is actually an invitation to something deeper? To help our trust. To maybe not just hear that he's there, but feel that he is there. And what if wrestling with God is how he's revealing himself to us? Where we're having to fight through some of these tensions. But he just doesn't come in the way that we often expect. And I would tell you to don't rush the night, because that's where God does his work. And let God do his work in your life in those dark places of struggle and unknowns. And I want you to think about this. Jacob didn't experience peace at first. The first thing he experienced was not peace, it was pressure. Because God comes not with comfort but with confrontation, and he doesn't give him peace until he gets the pressure. The breakthrough didn't come before the battle, it came through the battle. And oftentimes we're asking God to give us a breakthrough, but we don't want to go through the battle in order to get the breakthrough. And sometimes grace must wound deeply before it heals. You ever heard that? And sometimes we got to go through the battles. We've got to learn. We got to face some uncertainties, because it only pushes our trust in the Lord that much more. Because the one thing that Jacob learned was that pain will always precede the blessing. See, he refused to let go until he received the blessing. He was going to fight God. He wasn't letting go of that thing. I've got a 30-pound, probably more than that now, Boston Terrier at home. And we used to have this little, one of those dog ropes. And I'm telling you, I would grab it, he would pull it, and I would just pick him up. And he would just hang. He refused to let go. And it didn't matter what I did. I could have a treat over here and like, hey, I got this treat. He wasn't letting go of the rope. And so I would just pull him wherever he needed to be and pick him up and work out with him, whatever. And he just refused to let it go until my hand let it go. When my hand let go, he's like, look, I won. I won the competition. And he would prance himself around the room proudly with his rope in his mouth, because he wasn't willing to let go until he got the victory, until he got what he thought was his blessing. Well, see, Jacob refuses to let go until he received his blessing. He was not going to stop the fight before that blessing came. He was wounded. Look what it says in verse 25. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched out of his sockets. Y'all ever had hip issues? And then the man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. That's a weird thing to say in the middle of a fight. I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. And he replied, my name is Jacob. And he says in verse 28, your name will no longer be Jacob. The man told him, from now on, you're going to be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men, and you have won. Here's what's interesting. That Hebrew word there for touched in verse 25, that's not like a tap touch. That is a deliberate, targeted, I meant to grab that touch. And what it says here is it says that he touched Jacob's hip. What it means was God deliberately targeted his hip. God disables the strongest part of Jacob's body, his hip. And from then on, Jacob walks with a limp. He always has a reminder of the battle. And we would say, man, that was pretty brutal that God would make the guy limp the rest of his life, wouldn't it? But that limp becomes a sign of his transformation. It serves as a reminder that Jacob receives a new name. Because see, Jacob is a deceiver. Because what did he do? He deceived his brother Esau. And he's got a bad past. But God says, I'm giving you a new name. Yeah, Jacob is what your mom and dad gave you. But I'm giving you the new name. Your new name is Israel, which means one who struggles with God. Because you indeed have fought. And this is an identity shift. This is not just forgiveness, but this is a redefinition of who Jacob is. That God is saying, listen, I'm going to redeem you, but I'm going to have to take you through some things so that you understand that your strength has to rely on me and not on yourself. And we're going to go through some stuff, but you're going to come out on the other side, and there are going to be painful moments. You and I know this. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives are the ones that mark us forever. Because we all have a story of something painful, don't we? Something that was taken out of our lives, a struggle that we had, a diagnosis. And no matter what that painful moment is, you know, like I do, the scars always remain. The memories may linger. But so does the blessing. And here's what I want you to understand, that pain doesn't mean that God is absent. Sometimes it means that God is present in a way that you didn't expect. He's doing a deep work shaping us for what is next. I love the promise that God is not just at work right now, but He's also, whatever He's called me to, He is already out in front of me, preparing that and working that. And because I know that He's already out in front, I can have faith to make that jump into the what's next. Jacob's limp wasn't the end of his story. It was the evidence that God had touched his life in a way that he would never be left the same, that he would be a new person. And I think that's where you and I have to ask the question, like, what is our limp? What have we wrestled with? What is the limp? What is the scar? Where have we been wounded and changed? Don't hide your limp. Let your limp be your testimony. Sometimes we're so ashamed of our scars. But our scars preach. They're testimony to the goodness of God and what God has done and how He carried us through those moments. I love reading the Old Testament and how the Jewish people would always remind the previous generation of what God did to get them to the promised land. Telling the stories. Remember, He told them to grab 12 stones. Grab the stones, put them in your home, tell the story, tell the testimony of how good your God is. And I think you and I know the Israelites, that whole story of them getting from Egypt to the promised land, that wasn't easy, right? They had to struggle. I mean, to the point where God says, listen, this is only a 6-day walk to get you to the promised land, but you got some guys in the camp that aren't doing what they're supposed to, so we're just going to go ahead and let them walk around in the wilderness for 40 years because they refused to ask for directions. And what does the Bible say? That He ends up killing off an entire generation so that He can raise the next generation to go and take what He's given them. So sometimes there are moments that feel alone and feel dark, but God is not absent. God is at work. And we've got to look up and see Him. Realize that He's here. See, Jacob's in an interesting point here. Look at what he says in verse 30. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means the face of God. See, Jacob got a name change. He's like, if my name's getting changed, I'm going to change the name of this place that we're at right now because I met God here. And for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. As Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury. The struggle really was. It was face-to-face encounter with God. It was holiness coming against sinfulness. It was a divine encounter for Jacob that night. It wasn't by accident that he sends his family across. It wasn't by accident his possessions. It's not by accident that he's there. God meets him in the darkest moment is where he's met. And Jacob meets God in a way that he never had before. I'm just going to say that on a limb. I don't think Jacob had ever met God that way before because he had one bad hip, not two. Right? It wasn't just a night of pain for him, it was a night of purpose because Jacob met God in a way that he never had. And as the sun rises, that's symbolism. In our darkest moments, we have to remember there'll come a time where the sun will rise and expose all that has happened. That the sun will crest over that peak and begin to light up everything. And as the sun rises, Jacob limps away. Changed, blessed, and no longer by himself. Because he realizes, God, I've been with God. This is why he changes that name to the face of God. And the whole message is about this, that God invites us into honest struggle, not to destroy us, but to transform us. He doesn't shame you for wrestling. He doesn't shame you for questioning. I think he honors that. The struggle isn't a sign of our failures, I think it may be the clearest evidence that God is near. I think one of the things that helps us is just having some very honest conversations with God. God, I don't understand why you're doing this. Or God, I'm upset about this. I remember there was a time in my life where I had this honest, open, brutal, some people would say I was wrong, but this was between me and God, not between you, me, and God. But I had some pretty honest conversations where I had to tell God, I am ticked at you. Like, I don't like you very much right now because of what just happened. And just having these honest conversations, and it wasn't that God was like, ooh, I didn't see that coming. Ooh, you intimidate me. It was, come here. See, I've not been absent from the situation. The reason that you're mad at me is because you can't put any kind of understanding around what's going on. But if you would just come closer to me and listen and feel my presence, things would be different. And I can tell you that some of the moments where I have grown closest to God have been through moments of struggle and pain and alone and just felt in complete darkness. And it's in those places that I've had to have the hardest conversations with God. Not that I was trying to convince him and show him that I'm going to win this argument, but get it off your chest. Well, I don't think you should pray to God that way. Does God know everything? So I might as well get it off my chest. He's not offended because it gives me a place to speak and God a place to speak back in and correct that and to show me. Because I believe God invites us into honest struggles. This is what the cross shows us, that we have struggles, that Jesus had to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. Because it's a struggle. God wants to transform us. If you're in the middle of a fight, I would encourage you, do not let go. Don't let go. Maybe you're wrestling with grief that you can't seem to get rid of. It just keeps appearing. It just keeps coming back. Or maybe there's a decision that has no easy answer. You got to make a decision about something. You don't know what to say. Keep praying, keep pushing, keep going. Maybe it's a relationship that feels like it's too far gone. Like maybe it's a spouse. Maybe it's a child that you feel like that relationship's too far gone. Keep pushing. Keep pursuing. Keep wrestling. Do not let go. Do not give up. Listen to God through those moments. Maybe you fight doubt. Maybe you fight anxiety. And can I be honest? Maybe some of you just fight because you've been praying for some things and God just hasn't answered. That there's some unanswered prayers that you have begged, you have pleaded, you have asked, and God has not answered. And you feel like everybody else gets their prayer answered because they prayed to have a front row parking space at Target and they got it. And I'm just praying for one little thing and I don't feel like God's listening. Keep praying. Because what does he say? Ask. Now don't take that into prosperity gospel. And what do we receive? We receive his presence. Isn't that the greatest gift we could ever get is just his presence? Even if God doesn't speak, just knowing that he is in the room makes everything better, doesn't it? Makes everything better. I think that God does deep work in us through those painful moments. And that if we'll stay with him, if we hold on even in the pain, that you and I will discover what Jacob did. And what Jacob discovered was the blessing comes not by avoiding struggle, but by going through it with God. I think we would admit that we've gone through some painful things, but we've come out on the other side better people. Let me say it this way. Better followers of Jesus. And then your struggle has become a testimony to help somebody else do the same thing. I've been there. I've done that. Isn't it good to hear people say, I've been there. I've done that. I've had that same issue. One of my favorite things, this is going to sound very childish, one of my favorite things is going to visit another church and then seeing something mess up. Like feedback or the printer for the children's check-in not working. And it's not like, it's like, oh good, it's not just us. Because you feel like we're in this together, right? Because I think the place that you wrestle might just become the place where you'll see God's face if you'll just keep pushing, because he's going to reveal himself. But what happens when the wrestling doesn't end? I think you do what Jacob did. You don't fake peace. You don't walk away. You just hold on until God meets you in it. And here's the grace in all of this. The grace in all of this is this, that God didn't wait for Jacob to be strong before he showed him. He met him in the dark, and he touched him at his breaking point, and he gave him a new name while he was still limping, because that's who God is. Even in his pain, God still renames him. God still gives him purpose. God still gives him identity. Because God isn't just a God of victories. I believe God's also a God of valleys. We love mountaintops, but how many of you have been to the valley? The valley stinks, doesn't it? Like, the valleys are beautiful, but they can be painful. I'd much rather be on the mountaintop than have to go through the valleys. But God's the God of the valleys too. He's not just the God of Israel, right? He's also the God of Jacob. And I heard this a few years ago, and I found this fascinating. I looked into it some more this week, but every time they'd ask who the God is, well, he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and why not Israel? Because didn't God give him a new name? Because you think of Abraham, what do you think about? I think of Abraham, I'm thinking that this dude was faithful. Because I don't know that I could sign up to take my son to a mountain to sacrifice him. Abraham is faithful. I think if God told me at 80 years old, you're going to have more kids, I'd be like, no. Don't want that blessing. We're good. But you think about Abraham, you think about his strength and what he did, right? Like that's the name. They're saying the God of Abraham, that guy. That guy. The God of Isaac. I mean, Isaac is strong. He is a teenager. His daddy's like in his 80s when he lays him down to sacrifice him. Isaac could have come off of that altar and taken his dad out. He could have broken his hip. But he didn't. I mean, Abraham and Isaac, such strong names. And then there's Jacob, a deceiver, a mama's boy. So it would sound better if you would say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. But no, God wants us to know something here. That he's not just the God of the faithful and the strong, but he's also God of the strugglers. He is also the God of the one that feels like they're not enough and they're self-reliant and they're just not getting it. He is the God of that one too. So he not only meets us in our strength, God meets us in our weakness. And that's why Paul said, it's in my weakness that I'm made strong. It's in my weakness that I'm made strong. So right in your fear, right in your any further, there's a God who loves us, and there's a God who wants to do his deepest work in our lives in those places, because the place that we wrestle might just become the place that we see his face. So we have to fight it. I love that Jacob named that place the place of the face of God, because that's what it became for him, a place of struggle turned into a place of encounter. And maybe that's what this moment is for us, is that maybe our face of God is not a place, it's a season, it's a hospital room, it's a silent prayer, it's a long, dark night, and maybe like Jacob, you're just holding on just to survive. But what if the moment right now is when you stop surviving and start meeting with God, trusting him to sustain you? I want us to respond this morning in a couple of ways, because I think there's some things that probably you're wrestling with, like I am, some places of struggle. But here's a couple of ways I want you to respond this morning. Number one, I want you to find your corner. Find your corner. When you're not rushing the moment, I want you to just sit or kneel or just step off to the side or step to the back into this quiet space and just be real with God. Just pray. Tell him how you feel. Confess your struggles. Maybe your life is good and you don't have struggles, but you have someone that is. Start getting in the corner and praying for them, asking God to give you the words to help them push through. Say what's really on your heart. Can we just stop with the big spiritual language that we do with our prayers and just be real and just talk to God? Just talk to Him and tell Him things like, I'm scared, I'm stuck, I need you, I'm not very bright, I need you to help me. Those kinds of prayers, I believe that's the ones that shake heaven. And then I would challenge you this way to respond with, let your limp speak for you. Maybe you've been trying to hide the very thing that God wants to use, and instead of covering your limp, just confess it. This is where I've been hurt. This is where I've had to fight. Let somebody pray with you, share it with your life group, share it with your D group, because I believe that your wound can become somebody else's doorway to hope. Somebody else's doorway to hope. You don't need to win the fight. You just need to stay in it, because the place you wrestle may just become the place where you see His face. So let's linger, let's press in, and let's meet Him face to face. So I just want to pray for us as we close this morning. And just getting into a place of honesty. So if you'll bow your heads right where you are, this can be your corner of just telling God what your struggle is right now. Let Him know. Let Him know your struggle right now. What's on your heart? What's bothering you? What's keeping you up at night? How do you feel? How's it feel when you hear that name, that place, that event? Now I want you to just picture in your mind, for 30 seconds, just picture in your mind, standing in front of Jesus, holding those things in your hand. Standing in front of Him, holding those things in your hand. What are you doing with those? It's heavy. Now lay it at His feet. Lay it at His feet. And feel the weight come off. Because some of us are carrying things we were never meant to carry. So Father, I pray right now in this moment. It's so difficult because we have to get outside the norms, that we have to play this certain person and have this certain identity, and to play this part, to masquerade when we come to You as if we have it all together when we don't. And that's the beauty of the gospel, is the gospel is for people who don't have it all together. And I just pray in this moment right now that we would just be honest and real. Just have honest conversations, because it's in those that You're going to meet us and You're going to transform us to be made into Your character of who You are. And I just pray now, God, that You would speak loudly to us, as I know You will. Guide us. Heal our hearts from what has been broken. But God, just give us the courage just to be honest and to talk and have conversations with You. To not be ashamed of our struggle. But it's in that place that we know we'll find You. And God, I pray these things in Your holy name. Amen.